When I was younger, burning the midnight oil, chasing after every dollar, I picked up a side hustle as an Uber driver. This was in addition to my full-time gig in retail, where the grind of the counter and sales just didn't quite cut it for me financially. Rather than seeking out better opportunities or negotiating a raise like a savvy adult might, I opted for the classic move of taking on extra work. Living in the heart of a bustling city, cruising around in my beloved car, it seemed like a no-brainer to join the Uber ranks. This was about a decade ago when the company was really hitting its stride, causing ripples across the nation. Stories of folks pulling in six-figure incomes just by shuttling people around town were everywhere. Everyone I talked to echoed the same sentiment. It was easy money, ripe for the taking. And honestly, I can't dispute that. In my little side hustle as an Uber driver, I was pulling in a decent amount, but it wasn't the doubling of income I had hoped for. Plus, it took me to a whole new level of exhaustion, as I had to sacrifice sleep to squeeze in more productive Uber shifts. It felt like I was always on the go. I'd finish up my retail job around 5 p.m., grab a quick bite, and then dive straight into Uber until the wee hours, usually around 2 a.m. Anything after that, I quickly learned, was just attracting trouble. Back then, Uber didn't have quite the safety measures it does now, so some pretty wild stuff could happen in the back seat. Fast forward about 6 months into this new working world, and I had the hang of juggling double shifts. I knew the high-yield areas for pickups and how to swiftly navigate drop-offs and get back downtown. Taking a wrong turn meant winding up on the opposite side where there were loads of commercial and business parks. You'd end up making these awkward loops that burned extra time and gas. One spot I'd often linger near was the downtown hospital, mainly because of the ample parking space it offered. Finding a moment of respite in the midst of the chaos was like hitting the jackpot. I could just chill out, check my phone, and not worry about the hustle and bustle of traffic. If I felt like it, I could even catch a few Z's. With fast food joints and convenience stores nearby, I had everything I needed to stay in the game. Sure, I'd occasionally grab a Red Bull to keep me going, but it wasn't a regular thing. However, there came a point when I hit a wall. One night, in the midst of that relentless cycle, I found myself nearing my breaking point. It was during one of those slow periods, the kind where you're left twiddling your thumbs, unsure of what to do next. I held out hope for a surge in passengers later on, so I grabbed an energy drink from a vending machine in the hospital lobby, thinking it would give me the boost I needed. But despite my efforts, I found myself sinking into a deep, unintended slumber right there in the driver's seat, mouth agape, drooling, looking like a complete mess. Waking up in that state, completely unaware that I had even fallen asleep, was the worst feeling. My brain struggled to reboot, unable to make any connections despite the sparks flying everywhere. There have been moments where I wake up feeling completely disoriented, unsure of where I am, who I am, or what I'm supposed to be doing. Back in high school, I'd often nod off in class, and when a teacher would shake me awake, I'd be so startled that I couldn't even form coherent sentences. I'd just make odd noises and then fall silent, trying to regain my bearings. One time, I remember jolting myself awake with a kick because my head was at this weird angle. I let out a groan as I snapped back to reality, still sitting in my car, surrounded by darkness, with the same playlist playing. Glancing at the clock, I realized I'd only been out for about 15 minutes. Taking a deep breath, I settled back into my seat, realizing that a short catnap was surprisingly effective at recharging me. As I checked my phone, I noticed a notification from a potential passenger nearby. It was an opportunity to make a few extra bucks, so I took another sip of my drink, adjusted my mirrors, and prepared to shift into park. But then something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. There was someone sitting right behind me in the middle seat, and we made eye contact. I spun around, and there he was, sitting just a short distance away from me. He flashed a slight smile, almost like a friendly acknowledgement that I had nodded off. I was completely caught off guard, unsure of how to react. One part of me wanted to demand he leave, another wanted to put on a tough act, while yet another just wanted to ask why he was in my car. Then I noticed the Uber app open on his phone, and it clicked. I remembered the hospital sticker in my window. I must have been parked outside the hospital when he booked the ride. Seeing his phone helped me regain some clarity and calmed my initial panic. So I mustered up the courage and simply greeted him with a hesitant hi and asked what he was doing in my car. He hesitated for a moment, avoiding eye contact, before finally nodding in response. At least, he seemed somewhat normal. After buckling my seatbelt and composing myself, I engaged him in conversation, asking if he was looking for a ride. He nodded again, confirming my suspicion. I breathed a sigh of relief. As we continued our journey, I shared with him the story of how I ended up working 2 jobs and how exhaustion led me to fall asleep. I offered him a ride, jokingly suggesting that, in exchange, he'd give me a good review, preferably not mentioning my impromptu nap. We both chuckled at the idea. "I need to get downtown," he said, pointing back towards Jackson Drive, a familiar main street in the area. He gave me vague directions, mentioning it was close to an old music venue that had closed down years ago. Since I knew the area, I started the route without much hesitation. During the ride, we engaged in small talk, mostly about my little nap incident. His name was Donovan, and he shared that when he first got in the car, he noticed I was asleep and decided to wait quietly. "Well, thanks for not being a creep," I chuckled nervously. I was starting to panic until I saw your Uber app. Then it dawned on me. We weren't actually connected through the app. He hadn't ordered a ride, and I hadn't accepted any requests. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror, feeling a twinge of discomfort. "Hey, I just realized this ride isn't registered. Can you find me on the app quickly?" To my surprise, Donovan scoffed and looked out the window. "Oh, I'm not paying for this," he remarked casually. I laughed awkwardly, but he remained silent and the atmosphere grew tense. Glancing into the back seat, I suddenly noticed something. I had assumed Donovan was a typical passenger, but his attire hinted otherwise. He wasn't dressed in business casual. In fact, it was quite the opposite. He's a mess. Filthy, torn clothes, one shoe missing, sun-darkened face, the classic signs of someone living rough. And that backpack next to him? Grimy. It's evident he's homeless. It hits me as I take a second look. Donovan's wearing a hospital discharge bracelet, the paper kind. He probably OD'd, got Narcan, and now, thanks to my impromptu nap, he's hitching a ride back to his crack house. I shake my head, hit the blinker, and guide my car towards the next exit. "Where are you going?" he asks from the back. "I told you where we're going. I'm not driving you across town for free, dude. You're lucky I don't call the cops," I retort. To make my point, I grab my phone from the cup holder, showing him, "I mean business." But Donovan's not backing down. "You're lucky I don't strangle you with my shoelace," he threatens. Before I can react, his hands are around my throat, squeezing tight. Panic sets in as I struggle to break free. His breath is rancid, his grip unyielding. I try to create some breathing room, but it's futile. Minutes tick by and desperation sets in. Then, a thought hits me. Glancing at the mirror, I see we're alone on the highway. Without hesitation, I slam on the brakes. I was strapped in, but, unfortunately, Donovan behind me wasn't as fortunate. He lurched forward, crashing into my seat, which gave me a brief window of opportunity. With a surge of adrenaline, I used my free hand to break his grip and swiftly veered the car onto the shoulder. Donovan, now recovered, made another grab for me, but I wasn't about to let history repeat itself. We were at a standstill. Putting the car in park and activating the hazards, I decided enough was enough. I dialed 911, hitting the call button and bringing the phone to my ear. Donovan started to lose it, hurling threats, but eventually he began to exit the car. That's when I noticed he was clutching a purse, a rather nice one at that. Grumbling to himself, he slung his backpack over his shoulder, grabbed the purse, and vanished into the night air. As he began his trek down the shoulder of the exit ramp and back into the city, I heard the dispatcher's voice in my ear. Realizing I couldn't let this slide, I recounted the entire ordeal, detailing my location and the purse's whereabouts. There was a moment of silence from the dispatcher. Then she returned with shocking news. My report aligned perfectly with an earlier incident at the hospital where I was parked. Apparently, Donovan had been admitted, became agitated, and decided to leave, but not before helping himself to a purse from one of the rooms in his ward. The staff noticed the theft shortly after his departure. The search for the missing purse escalated quickly as hospital security reviewed the surveillance footage. It didn't take long to spot Donovan strolling out the front door with the purse in hand. Seeing himself on camera, he panicked and broke into a run, zigzagging through the parking lot until he stumbled upon my idling car. Donovan must have thought he'd hit the jackpot, but his luck took a nosedive when he spotted me asleep in the driver's seat. Sneaking into the back, he hoped to evade any potential security patrols. Needless to say, his night took a turn for the worse when he exited my car. I alerted dispatch to Donovan's whereabouts and even followed him down the exit ramp. But before I could intervene, a police cruiser intercepted him a couple of blocks away. With lights flashing and sirens blaring, Donovan found himself in handcuffs. The phone Donovan had in his hand turned out to be the woman's. Apparently, he'd found it in her purse. He was trying to order an Uber, just in case I didn't wake up. Talk about a stroke of luck. After giving my statement to the officers, Donovan was hauled off, likely spending a few weeks in a jail cell to dry out. It goes without saying, but always remember to lock your car doors, folks.
Throughout my life, I've been a night owl, so it's no surprise that I exclusively work night shifts. I've never been one to thrive in a team environment, so I opted for a job where I could work independently, nighttime janitorial work for my local school district. After graduating from high school, I dove straight into this role. Nightly cleaning has always been a part of health codes in most areas, but in recent years, its importance has only grown. My first assignment was at a sizable K-12 school. While there were a few daytime custodians, during the night shift, it was just me and one other person, dividing the school down the middle. Interactions with my coworker were rare, which suited me just fine. Every night, the routine was the same. Mopping or vacuuming every floor, disinfecting every desk, table, and door handle, and cleaning every toilet, urinal, and sink. It's a full 8-hour shift, and during that time, I don't exchange a single word with another person. It's bliss, really. Most of my coworkers are women, and they prefer it that way. Minimal interaction. When I tell people about my job, many assume the toughest part is cleaning up after the students' messes. And while that's certainly a challenge, it's not the hardest part. I suppose they're onto something, but I always tell them I'd rather tackle 10 clogged and traumatized toilets every single night than have to work directly with another human being all day long, especially a crowd of them. There's one particular incident that solidifies my stance. It was the night after Halloween, and I arrived for my usual 8 to 5 shift, diving into work without even exchanging greetings with my coworker. We began at opposite ends of the building, planning to meet in the middle to minimize interaction. The first hour passed relatively normally, except for one glaring anomaly. Despite keeping my music at a low volume through my headphones, I kept hearing strange noises from outside. Typically, all the faculty members are gone by 8's high, but occasionally someone stays late. I couldn't quite discern what I was hearing over my music, but I wasn't in the mood to investigate, so I shrugged it off. A little while later, I took a break from mopping to change the water in the bucket. It took me about 5 minutes, and on my way back to where I left off, I passed by one of the hallways I had just mopped. To my annoyance, I noticed that the wet floor sign had fallen over. For legal reasons, I had to step over the wet floor and set the sign upright again, then mop over my tracks on the way out. As I approached the fallen sign, something else caught my eye. A set of smaller footprints in the water, leading to and from the sign. It looked like something a child would make. After setting the sign back up, I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I followed the tiny footprints, resigning myself to redoing the entire hallway. They led all the way to the end, where a flight of stairs ascended to the second floor. As I climbed, the tracks dried up, disappearing. Arriving on the second floor, I was met with silence. No sign of anyone. Pulling out my phone, I paused my music, ready to listen for any movement. Just then, a flicker of movement caught my eye at the end of the hallway. Simultaneously, I heard echoing footsteps reverberating through the empty school. With cautious steps, I advanced towards the end of the hall, but still, no one was in sight. Suddenly, the sound of a child's laughter filled the air, sending chills down my spine. Despite feeling like I was in a horror movie, annoyance outweighed fear at that point. Standing there, scanning the surroundings, I froze as a crash echoed from the first floor. Rushing downstairs, my heart racing, I nearly lost it when I saw the mop bucket toppled over. The mop bucket I had just refilled was knocked over, sending water cascading everywhere, creating a massive pool. Fuming, I cursed under my breath as I hurried to the nearest janitor's closet for a dry mop and a stack of towels. It took a solid half hour to clean up the mess, followed by another 15 minutes to redo the hallway that got soaked. Consequently, my lunch break dwindled to a mere 15 minutes. Driven by frustration, I stormed to the other side of the school and confronted my coworker, accusing her of playing tricks on me. She appeared genuinely bewildered and offered assistance, but I dismissed her without a word, returning to my duties with renewed determination. As I powered through the tasks, my mind raced, debating whether to report the incidents to the school authorities or even involve the police. However, I ultimately dismissed the idea, fearing I'd be seen as irrational, just as I had to my coworker. Hours passed without incident, until suddenly, at 11C, all the lights in the school went out, plunging everything into darkness for a few agonizing seconds, before emergency lights flickered to life, casting an eerie reddish glow. The unexpected blackout rattled me, and despite trying to rationalize it as a technical glitch or the mischievous antics of students, my mind conjured up a myriad of unsettling possibilities. With keys to the electrical room and being the closest, I abandoned my tasks and marched towards the source of the problem. I was seething with frustration over losing more time and missing out on my entire lunch break. But halfway to the electrical room, something jolted me out of my concerns. A blood-curdling scream pierced the air, the panicked shriek of my coworker echoing endlessly. Frozen in my tracks, I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. Seconds later, a door slammed open with a deafening crash, as if someone was desperately trying to break free from the inside. My heart pounded in my chest. Was it my coworker escaping, or someone else breaching the school? Forcing myself to move forward, I reached the electrical room and hesitated outside the cracked open door, dread creeping over me. Slowly, I pushed it open, revealing a shape lurking ominously in the darkness. My blood ran cold at the sight. It could have been anyone. Abandoning any hope of turning on the lights, I fumbled for my phone in my pocket. But as I made a move, the figure lunged forward, slamming the door shut in my face. Cursing, I stumbled backward, my back hitting the wall with a thud. Regaining my balance, panic set in, and I bolted, desperate to escape the eerie darkness that enveloped the school. In a moment of selflessness, I dashed to the other side of the school to check on my co-worker's safety. After scouring several hallways, I stumbled upon her mop bucket abandoned in the middle of the floor, next to an empty bathroom. Without hesitation, I hurried over, bracing myself for the worst, but hoping to find her unharmed. As I scanned the area, nothing seemed out of place except for her absence. I frantically searched the dimly lit corridors, feeling a sense of isolation creeping over me. Yet, I wasn't entirely alone. The laughter of a child echoed in the distance, sending shivers down my spine. Clutching the mop handle tightly, I lifted it from the bucket, ready to defend myself with whatever I could find. With my heart pounding, I fixated on the source of the laughter, my focus narrowing to a single point. In a terrifying moment, a whispered hello sent a chill down my spine, and without hesitation, I spun around, thrusting the mop handle forward. The impact was swift, and a grunt escaped the intruder as they crumpled to the ground, followed by the sickening sound of retching. I demanded to know their identity, but instead, they broke down in tears. Gradually, through the dim light, I discerned the figure, a student crouched on the floor. In an instant, my fear shifted from danger to the dread of potentially losing my job for injuring a student. As events unfolded in the following days, it turned out that it was a harmless prank, orchestrated by a trio of siblings, two twins in 9th grade and their younger brother. They sought to prolong the Halloween spirit by pulling a prank on the night staff, hiding in the lockers. Luckily, the unused lockers provided them a hiding spot, and their slender frames allowed them to squeeze in undetected. Despite the initial scare, the school district understood the circumstances, and I was able to retain my job. However, I was transferred to a different school as a precaution. This experience solidified my aversion to dealing with people, especially kids.